We have a really fantastic talk for you today. Andrew is the Director of Network Strategy at Bright Health. He's going to talk to you about his personal story and, as you can see here on the screen, data. Andrew is exceedingly talented when it comes to data visualization, kind of that mental map of what you can do with big data sets. And I think, there's all of this kind of ongoing press and talk about, the importance of data across different industries. And it's incredibly important in healthcare specifically, and I think this industry may be a little bit behind some of the others, but we're certainly catching up in how we use big data to, do risk analyses and projections and really understand the population. So again, I think this is a really important and exciting talk. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask your questions, as they come up. I'll jot them down, and then we'll save some time at the end for a good Q&A with Andrew. So turning it over to you.
All right. Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here and speaking with all of you today. I'm coming to you live from my apartment in Lower Manhattan, where I've been quarantining for the past 5 months. And I have to admit that this is the first time I've worn a collared shirt in 5 months. So I'm dressed to impress and really excited to be here. So as Rebecca mentioned, I wanted to cover a couple items today. I wanted to share my career journey. I wanted to touch on healthcare analytics and then share some tips and tricks on storytelling with data visualization. So, which brings me to my first slide, data, a love story. So I was a little nervous putting this out there. I'm vulnerable and kind of exposing my inner nerd by doing this, but it's absolutely true. I love working with data. And while this is true today, I can say that this wasn't always the case. As a student growing up, I struggled. I was a dyslexic kid with every learning disability that you could imagine. I specifically had trouble with reading and writing, which created a displeasure with everything associated with school. But luckily, I was able to find some comfort in athletics and sports. And when I was growing up, I excelled in football and lacrosse. And when in high school, it's funny, I recognized that in order for me to continue playing sports in college, I needed to stay in good academic standing. And I was fortunate enough to see this through and get good enough grades just to get into college. And I was able to earn an athletic scholarship to the University of Massachusetts. So when I got to college, I started recognizing my comfort with math. Came much more naturally to me than reading and writing. So I decided to pursue a degree in kinesiology, which is the study of the body in motion. As an athlete, I was always interested in finding ways to improve performance in my training, and this major really gave me that opportunity to learn more about that. It's very heavily weighted to science and math, and a lot of these science classes I took, they had public speaking as a part of the curriculum, as a part of like the projects I was working on. And it absolutely terrified me. My heart would skyrocket anytime I would raise my hand in class. And those mandatory dreaded class presentations, I would spend hours on my slides and handouts. I figured if I wasn't confident communicating orally, I could at least communicate visually. And as I realized, and through this, I realized that I could tell stories in a compelling way using numbers and visualizations. And this started to boost my confidence as a presenter. So 10 plus years later, I never would guess that I'd be speaking with you all today and sharing this story. So again, very, very cool for me and excited to be here. Upon graduating, I continued to pursue my athletic career. I played a year of professional lacrosse. And for those not familiar with the sport, you don't make a lot of money doing this. I was trying to find some ways to earn a living on the side. I interviewed for all types of jobs and I couldn't land anything. It was a really tough time for me. I always identified myself as an athlete. I was proud of my athletic accomplishments, but I quickly realized that I couldn't rely on this anymore, and nobody was going to give me a job just because I was good at sports. So after many failed attempts at trying to enter the job market, I decided to go back to school and was presented with an opportunity to continue my education and get my master's degree while coaching college lacrosse. So really perfect situation for me. I got to coach college lacrosse, and my compensation was my degree. I received an MBA in healthcare administration, and was always interested in healthcare up until this time. Through my studies, again, majoring in kinesiology, the track was a lot of the people that I went to school with went on to physical therapy or medical school. So I felt this was a way for me to continue that track in healthcare. Also, my mother's a nurse. I always had an appreciation for what she did when I grew up. So definitely interested in getting into the field. So upon graduating my MBA, I had the options of continuing coaching, but was interested in taking on a new challenge outside of sports, and the challenge within healthcare. So I was able to land a job as an administrative fellow with a health system down in Miami, Florida. And for those that are not familiar with fellowships, it's a 1 to 2 year leadership rotation where you rotate throughout different parts of the company. I saw HR, finance, operations, and I knew I wanted to be in the industry. I just didn't know where I fit. So this was like the perfect job for me to get exposure to a health system that had a wide array of services. And luckily, I was exposed to the strategic planning department, and I immediately found comfort there. It was a group that leveraged data and quantitative methods to inform decision making. Some of those decisions include decisions on what to invest in, where they wanted to expand our business, and what types of services were worth expanding. So after about 3 years of living the life on the beach down in Miami, I decided it was time to relocate back up to the Northeast. I'm originally from New Jersey, not far from New York City. So wanted to come closer to home, and was able to land a position in the strategy department at NYU. So before relocating, I knew how competitive the New York City market was. So I needed to do something to set myself apart. And I put together a 15-page portfolio highlighting my experiences and the projects that I worked on in this health system down in Miami. And I mailed this portfolio to the senior vice president of strategy at NYU. And though I never actually spoke to him about this, I think he appreciated the move. He ended up handing my portfolio to some of the folks within the strategy team. It was pretty seamless from there. All the dreaded interviews that I've gone through, this move made the interview process much more seamless for me.
I'm jumping in. It was the most impressive book I have ever seen.
Yeah, I spent 6 months developing that portfolio.
It was photos and references, and it was basically like a incredibly beautifully put together, built out resume. And so what I'll say, even from a hiring perspective, of if you do go that extra mile, it really pays off. That was a genius thing that you did, Andrew.
Thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca and others have always busted my chops over that move, but I'm very proud of it. And it served me well. It served me well. So at NYU, as Rebecca mentioned, we're going back and forth here. I had the opportunity to work closely with Rebecca, which was an amazing experience. For those that work with her, you're very fortunate to do so. She was a mentor. She's a friend. She was my boss and held me accountable at times. So really was fortunate for that experience to work with Rebecca. And then she really put me in positions to develop and hone my problem solving skills and further my comfort and uh, analytical abilities and my comfort with data. And NYU was a culture that really embraces analytics. Decisions don't get made without data. So as a result, I was put in a position where I could enjoy hours a day of analyzing and interpreting numbers and ultimately communicating stories uh, in a visual way through data. So with this role, again, it's in the strategy department. It's project-based work. You get exposure to all different areas of the company and different elements of the industry as well. So it was an incredible experience. And to give some examples of some of the projects that I worked on, I did a lot of work focused on growth and using analytics to assess the market, the New York City market, and the surrounding suburbs to identify opportunities for growth and expansion. Supported the acquisition and integration of a health system. And after supporting that merger, I went and engaged in this really analytical exercise of analyzing the operations of a hospital and completing a future state exercise where we worked with clinical staff to project out what care would look like 10 years down the road. So spent months just looking at the flow of patients, the types of clinical procedures that were going on in the hospital. I got to really understand the relationships of services through that exercise. And again, it was a ton of analysis and data mining. So a lot of fun for me. Which brings me to my current role at Bright Health. After 6 amazing years at NYU, I was ready for a new challenge. My career has been focused on the provider side of the industry in large, mature health systems. So I went for something completely different, looking for like a test for myself. And that test is Bright Health, which is a insurance startup. It's a 4-year-old company that was founded by the former CEO of United Healthcare. And after some initial venture funding, the company began offering insurance in Colorado. And over the past 3 years, we've expanded to 13 states. And over the course of this time, we've received 4 different rounds of funding representing over $1 billion in investment. So it was a way for me to enter into what felt like a riskier environment, but understanding that they're backed financially gave me some confidence as well. So we offer Medicare Advantage plans, and we offer some plans on healthcare.gov, the exchanges. And what makes us unique to other health insurance plans is our care partner relationship, which is a deep relationship with providers. When we enter a new market, we partner with one large health system, and we develop a co-branded health plan around that system, creating an affordable narrow network product. So I know this is kind of getting technical. The concept of a narrow network product is probably new to a lot of us. It's basically a way of keeping insurance premiums affordable. And as a consumer, what you get in return are less or narrower options for healthcare options. So instead of having the ability of choosing freely and choosing the hospital or the provider of care freely, you have a narrower selection of health options to work with. And if you end up receiving care outside of those options, there's a higher out-of-pocket cost associated with that.
Andrew?
Yep.
Could you, just on the lower right, could you switch the slides just into like presentation mode?
Let's see. I'll do my best here.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So the challenge here, Rebecca, is I'm working off of some slides or some notes to keep me guided. Do you mind if I stay here?
Please stay there. Go for it.
Is that cool?
Yeah. That looks
Thank you.
great.
I need that crutch. I need a
I
crutch to keep me focused here.
totally get it. That looks better. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So my role at Bright Health, Rebecca mentioned the director of network strategy. And what that means is I lead a team of analysts to really help direct the company's growth strategy. And as I mentioned, we're growing. We're in 13 states. We're looking to go national. So we're using market data to design high quality, robust health insurance networks that are centered around those health systems that I described, the care partner relationship. So this is a very analytical function. And since we're a fairly new company, our processes aren't well defined. The data isn't well organized. It's a mess. So I'm taking the lead and partnering with folks across Bright Health to organize this information, to add rigor to those processes, and to really refine the way that we look at healthcare nationally. So I've spent much of the presentation sharing how I've made a career out of leveraging analytics in healthcare. I see this field becoming much larger in the years to come. We've seen the digitization of health records transitioning from paper records to electronic records. And the industry sits on top of a treasure trove of data and information. And as analytical applications improve and more data continues to get collected and organized, there's a tremendous career opportunity within this healthcare analytics field. So the healthcare analytics field is positioned really to enable improvements in operational efficiency, things like real-time reporting that can provide timely insights, personalized medicine, tailoring medical care around individual characteristics, cohort treatment, helping to manage care of large populations in a really efficient way. The list goes on. I think there's just so much potential here. So I want to flip over to some tips and tricks for data visualization. In school, we learn a lot about language and math. On the language side, we learn how to put words together into sentences and tell stories. And with math, we learn how to make sense of numbers, but it's rare to pair these two together. So what I'd like to spend some time on the rest of the presentation is some tips and tricks for data visualization and what I use when using data for storytelling. And a lot of these principles can be found in the book that I listed at the bottom of the page. It's a book I read a couple years ago. It's called Storytelling with Data, a Data Visualization Guide for Business Professionals. So there are many tools available to us. I've listed some of the more popular applications on this slide. The three applications seen at the top are the ones that I use most frequently. My favorite is Tableau. I found it to be intuitive and the functionality to be somewhat limitless. With that being said, I spend a lot of time in Excel and PowerPoint. You can obviously see this is a PowerPoint presentation. Microsoft Office is probably the most widely used tool available. And one thing I'd like to call out is that proficiency with these tools are no longer a differentiator. They're an expectation of most employers. When training employees or talking to my peers, I often hear people say they want to learn Excel shortcuts or they want to learn how to use Tableau. And I think this is all great, but some of it's a little bit misguided. So I think what I focus on as an analyst is that there's a story in your data and your tools don't really know what that story is. And that's where it takes an analyst or a communicator to find that information and really bring that to life. So I think the underlying characteristic here for somebody that's interested in analytics is just curiosity, right? You want to dig into the data and find really valuable information that's valuable to you and then valuable to others as well. So that brings me to my first lesson, which is understanding the context. So this might be counterintuitive, but successful data visualization does not start with successful data visualization. And even before we get into context, we should probably differentiate between exploratory and explanatory analyses. So exploratory is usually phase 1 and explanatory is phase 2. So exploratory analyses review a wide breadth of information. We're searching for nuggets of information that we think are worth exploring more deeply. And once you go deeper and understand those nuggets, then you enter into that explanatory phase. And I usually spend a lot of time with stakeholders in this explanatory phase. I try to understand and interpret the data. So I interview them, I ask questions, I bring the data to them just to make sure that I'm on the right track, I'm validating what I'm seeing, rather than getting too far down the road without their guidance. So explanatory analyses, it's helpful to know a couple things before getting started. First is, who are you going to present to? The more information you know about your audience, the better positioned you'll be for successful communication. So who's the key decision maker? What are they motivated by? What information is sensitive to them? These are all questions that you really want to know and will improve the outcome of your communication. The next question is, what information do you want to share to your audience? The thing you want to think through is, what makes this interesting or relevant to the audience? And how can I frame the story so the audience clearly understands why they should care about this? A mentality that I always go into an analysis or a presentation with is that I need to be the subject matter expert of the information that I'm sharing. And this is something that my boss at NYU drilled into me. You have to own that information and really be confident when sharing that with your audience and be ready for any questions that come up. This includes the mechanism of communication and how that information is presented. I think on this slide, you could see on the drawing on the right-hand side, that varies depending upon the type of communication. So in a live presentation, you want to probably go with a little bit less detail, or if you're writing an email or it's a written communication, you have the ability to go much deeper and much more detailed. And the last is, what data do you have available? And if it's unavailable, what's the ROI of acquiring that? So if it's unavailable within your company, you might have to go out and purchase that data. Maybe it is available in your company, but it's just unstructured and unorganized. And there's an investment associated with that as well, just time, right? So in these situations, you want to understand the ROI and the effort versus impact of gathering and analyzing data. So these next two slides really highlight some common visuals that I use to help illustrate trends. The first is simple text. If you have a number or two that you want to share, you don't have to do a graph. You could just simply put that number on the paper. You can see that in the top left-hand side of the slide. The next is a table. I use this a lot because it's an easy way to throw a lot of information onto a slide. But technically, you should probably avoid this, especially during presentations, because it's an easy way to lose your audience. They get lost in the numbers. So depending upon the form of communication, you want to consider that distraction factor. The next is a heat map. A heat map makes a table way easier to digest because you're using color to help guide the reader's eye, and you're showing them what's important and what's not important. The next is a scatter plot. So a scatter plot is useful in showing the relationship between two variables, and it's often used in science and less used in the business world. The next is line graphs are commonly used to show data elements over a time series, and a slope graph shows a trend over 2 time periods, and you could quickly see whether that trend is positive or negative, it's moving up or moving down. It's an easy way to display that. The next is vertical bar graph. So this is a really common visualization, and some people think this is boring, and I think it's great because it's boring. I think it's great because it's easy to interpret. We've all seen this before, and I think generally you want to avoid being cute, and it's all about just getting the point across. So I think this is a great way to do that. Which brings me to the stacked vertical bar, which is a way to show that same type of information, but you're showing a breakdown of different categories of that information through color. The next is waterfall charts, and this type of chart can pull apart pieces of information to focus on each piece of information at one time, showing a starting point to an end point, increasing or decreasing, resulting at the end. So the next is a horizontal bar. This is the same thing as a vertical bar, but I like to use these, especially if I'm using labels and the labels are long. I think it's easier to fit that description on the slide, and it's easy for the reader, the audience to read as well. Stacked horizontal bar, same as a stacked vertical bar. And then the last one is square area. So I avoid these. And again, I think they're a little too cute and tough to absorb. But I tend to see these on like infographics and stuff. So eliminating clutter. This next slide, I want to talk about cognitive load. So every single data element that you add to a slide takes up cognitive load. In other words, it takes up brain power to process. So we really want to be selective in the number of visual elements that we allow into our communication. What I like to do is I create the visual, I take a break from that visual, and I come back to it maybe the next day with a critical lens, and I go and I try to scrub off the non-value added elements. I look for clutter, and these are, again, those visual elements that take up space but don't really increase the understanding. And I feel like some analysts try to add clutter at times because I think that these visual elements make it look smarter or more complex. And we actually want to do the opposite. So we want the visuals to be intuitive and easy to understand. And I think this example on this slide helps really illustrate that lesson. You can clearly see the difference between these two graphs. They're telling the same story, but the graph on the left is just a lot busier, right? And I think this is actually the default in Excel. You can see the heavy borders, the decimals, the grid lines, the data marks. These are all elements that are, again, just taking up brain power. So I really like to scrub that stuff off, and you could see that in the graph on the right-hand side. So simple lesson, just keep it simple. So on the last slide, I talked about the elements that distract the reader. On this slide, I'm going to share how you can use elements to help guide the reader or focus the reader's attention on certain areas. So in analytics, this is called pre-attentive attributes. And these are visual properties that we notice without conscious effort. So these elements are color, intensity and hue, form, line length, line width, size and shape, spatial position is another one. And as I mentioned, it could be leveraged to direct the audience's attention to where you want to focus. A really simple example of this is the exercise on the left-hand side. You can see two separate series of data. And if I was to ask you to count the number of threes, it would be much easier to perform that exercise in the second series of data. So this example shows how you could use intensity of color to focus the reader's attention. So you could also use these attributes to create like a visual hierarchy using color. And that's expressed in the tables on the right-hand side. So there's a right way and there's a wrong way to use color. You could see the table on the left, there's like a rainbow color scheme. And I look at this and I get confused. I don't know where I want to look. So this is the wrong way to use color. The table on the right-hand side shows the right way. And again, what the visual is doing is it's creating a hierarchy. So when you look at this for the first time, you know where to focus your attention first. And then you kind of go through a visual progression of that data, and it's much easier to absorb that information. And it's a really good practice, and I try to use that element in really all of my visualization. So in closing, I find analytical work to be really rewarding, really fulfilling. I've loved making a career out of this. I see the potential in this industry. I think it's going to grow. And for you, for those that are creative, that like visualizing or drawing pictures, and also like math, I think this is a really good path for you. So I hope you learned a little bit from my experience, and you know, hopefully you learned from some of the lessons I shared as well.
Thank you, Andrew. That was fantastic. There are some great questions coming through. You know, and even a question that I have of, can you share some examples of, you know, some of the specifics of when you use data, you know, in your current role and your prior roles, and any examples, and I can think of a few where, you know, maybe you were going down a path, or, you know, a team you were working with was going down a path, and what you uncovered in the analysis actually forced everyone to change course.
I think in its simplest form, right, you're bringing information to light. I think in healthcare, when working with clinicians and working in operations, people are focused on patient care. They're focused on keeping their operations running. They're not always reflecting and pausing and looking at patterns over time and looking at data. So really the way that I've used data in those scenarios is just bringing current state to life, right? And exposing simple trends. You could obviously get really complex with information, but just, again, I try to keep it really simple with the audiences I work with, and especially when working with clinicians and operational leaders at NYU. I just try to bring it in front of them in a very non-critical way, and share the common themes that I'm seeing within the data. Some examples of that. So I mentioned that we acquired a health system when I was at NYU. And after acquiring this health system, we were given the opportunity to work with a network of federally qualified health centers. And this network of FQHCs didn't have a culture of analytics. They never really looked at data. They didn't have the resources analytically in terms of analysts or project managers or people to really take the time to look at this. So I was put in a unique position to really bring their company and this entity to life through data. And it was incredibly fulfilling for me because it validated what this group felt the entire time, right? They know, they see the patterns day to day, but to actually confirm that with information helped expose opportunities for improvement, both clinically and operationally.
Question, do you find, the role and working with data stressful? How do you avoid self-burnout?
I think it's easy to get lost, right? And I think that's why it's important to come in with a really well-defined scope and a good hypothesis, right? So in healthcare, there's so much to explore, right? So many areas and so many things you could dig into. But I try to rely on the partners that you're going to be working with. If you're on the provider side, you're going to be working with clinicians, you're going to be working with folks that are really close to the operations on the business side. And I rely on them a lot as an analyst, right? I rely on their questions and their observations to help guide me in my analyses. So I hear a question, and the first thing that I think of is, where can I go for the data, right? Does this data exist? And is it messy? Is it reliable, right? So I think going in with that scope defined and going in with the guidance and support of your partners really helps avoid those downstream issues and burnout. And then you could always, do some analyses, go back to those stakeholders and say, am I on the right track? Am I looking at this correctly? And there's this constant iterative process with the different stakeholders you work with.
I think it's a great point. We have a saying that's not that flattering, but garbage in, garbage out. The output of the data is only as good as the quality of the data that you're working with. So especially if you're looking at, fields where you're looking at people's responses, or, press Ganey, which I know we had talked about another session with Joe Leggio, and you're trying to sort through comments and potentially put together some graphs of what people's experiences are. The data and the output that you're able to present is really only as good as the data that you have, and when it's, the inputs. And so I think that's a good awareness to have of just, before you even start trying to visualize and filter, you need to really understand what you're working with and what the quality of it is and where the gaps may be, because otherwise you're going to put out an output that may not be reliable. And I think one thing that is also important with any data analysis is that, people take numbers very seriously, as they should, and it's your presenting fact. And so you really have to be very comfortable, and know that data inside and out, and know where there may be anomalies in the data and be able to articulate and explain that. And I think a really good analyst, or even a really good, healthcare provider and clinician that is doing a presentation and, would like another FTE, is putting together a business case, you really need to understand what you're putting forward. Otherwise, you can lose that trust very quickly with administration and quickly not get what you want.
That's a really good point. I'll echo that. A mentality that I always go into analyses with is data is imperfect, right? There's flaws in everything that you're going to touch. And the more you work with information, you'll end up finding those flaws and those limitations. So that's something you just figure out over time and more experience.
Andrew, is there anything when you look back on your career that you would have done differently?
I think, honestly, I don't think so. I'm not a person that regrets anything, right? I think that each experience, there's something to be learned from each experience. And I've had some ups and downs in my career. I've had some really challenging moments. And the lessons that you learn through those challenges and the negative experiences are incredibly valuable. So there's nothing I regret. There's nothing I would change. I think I've always approached my career in a way, and I've used my career to like understand myself. And I'm constantly trying to put myself in a position that's a way that, in a position to be true to myself, right? Understanding what makes me happy, understanding what I enjoy doing, working with people I enjoy working with. Um, so I'm constantly reflecting on that, understanding myself deeper. Um, and no, I think every experience I've had is valuable. So there's nothing I don't think I would change.
I think we all learn just as much from the failures, probably more than the successes. So it's a great attitude to have. Um, where do you see data visualization continuing to go in healthcare? You know, what do you see for the future of this particular kind of subset of the industry?
So obviously applications become more sophisticated. The use of AI and machine learning and all these things that you hear about in business journals, like that's coming. That stuff is very real. And that will be a part of our industry very soon. But before you get to the data visualization piece, I think what's happening on the data side is really going to enable a lot of that to happen. So on the data side, healthcare data is very sensitive, right? This is patient information. This is their health information. There's laws to protect it. But to that, from an analytical standpoint, I think there's going to be ways to help leverage some of that and still maintain protection over the patient. So I see, from a data perspective, ways to really leverage this information to inform decision making, to improve medicine. I see a connection over almost like a liquidity of data over time, where data is going to be merged across different platforms, and those relationships will enable data visualization and insights down the line.
This is only going to get bigger and bigger and more important across healthcare. And you know, I can even tell you, you know, at Northwell, the number of dashboards that we have. You know, and it really is, from, you know, an operational and administrative perspective, how I run my day is by, you know, looking at our performance, you know, and there are centralized teams that do an amazing job of really summarizing it. And I do a lot of my own analysis as well here, but, you know, being able to look at, you know, how many surgical cases we're doing, how many clinic visits we have, you know, are we getting our new patients in a timely manner? Are people canceling our appointments? Are they showing up on time? So there's just so much information that you can use to look at how to run your business and whatever side of the business you're on efficiently, whether it's, again, operations, administration, quality management. You know, I think it almost feels like, and I'm sure even, I know 5 years ago, it wasn't like this in healthcare. And now it feels like you're, you know, you're steering a ship blind if you don't have that information at your fingertips. So I think it's just going to get more and more important in healthcare, and of course other industries as well. Question of, and this gives me a chuckle because this was actually a case study question.
Jeez.
Who are you typically presenting to? And I'll even throw in, and how do you tailor your messages and what you present for any given audience?
Honestly, for me, I want it to make sense to me, right? And I'm consistently doing this exercise of I create a visual and I try to, again, take a break from it. I come back to it and I say, is this intuitive? And I almost like look at it very quickly. And when I do that, I try to spend like 3-4 seconds on a slide and say, I want to be able to absorb the information on that slide in 5 seconds tops, right? And if I could absorb that information, then I'm doing that correctly. So I really aim to be intuitive with my analytics. I think so. For me, if it makes sense to me, hopefully it's going to make sense to other people. So I constantly am looking at my visualization through that critical lens and trying to put somebody else's perspective into that. So that's probably the first step. But then again, the more you know about your audience, the better. Some people want information displayed in certain ways. Some people just want the number. Some people want the story. The people that just want the number, maybe it's more of a verbal update and you just give them the hard facts, right? And you tell the story verbally. And some people love the visualization and like to see things through pictures and through graphs. So it's really knowing that audience, but the first person is me. I just need to make it, it needs to make sense to me. It needs to be intuitive.
I'd say a good rule of thumb, and it doesn't hold true in every case, but I do think as you work with people that are more and more senior, your ability to summarize and roll up information, and provide them the very precise information that they're looking for and that they need to know to make a decision is really a reflection on, how successful you were at summarizing that data or at telling that story. Again, as you kind of grow up in your career, you're going to see it. And this again goes for whether you're a physician, a nurse, an administrator, when you're presenting to someone at a fairly senior level, they're busy, they want the facts that they need, the information they need, they want it to be accurate, succinct, and they want to be able to make a decision off of it. And so I think that's just an incredibly important concept and good way of thinking. And you may get the occasional very senior person that really wants to sit in the weeds with you. But I'd say more often than not, people want the quick facts, the key points so that they can make a decision and they can move on to the next decision that they have to make. And that even goes, I'm sure some of you have taken business writing. You don't want to send incredibly lengthy emails to people. You want to do things quickly. You want to put your key points in the first sentence, so that people can make decisions. I think it's really the same concept with data analysis and with presentations. Get to the point and allow people to make their decision and move on to something else.
One other point that I'd like to bring up is there's that key decision maker. There's that executive that you're working towards. Shop your story around before it gets to them, right? Again, you're the first person that's going to be looking at this. Make sure it's intuitive to you, but then share it with others and ask them for their feedback, right? Ask them to validate the information. Ask them for feedback on the visualization. Get their perspective on how to present it to the ultimate stakeholder. Gather as much information as possible because you want to factor that into your storytelling.
Just a few more questions. A few questions on your portfolio, Andrew, and what you is so eye-catching, or just any advice that you have for folks that maybe would be interested in doing the same thing, even just length and content. Talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, it was a way to set myself apart and really a result of, I think, early in the presentation, I shared the interview process that I went through in earlier in my career. And even getting to that interview point is really, really hard. So I wanted to bypass all of HR and all the screenings that come before the stakeholders, and said, let me go right to the decision maker. So I knew I only had one shot to catch their attention. So I needed to make this portfolio perfect. And I literally spent 6 months on this thing. I knew I needed to get back to New York. To me, that's where I needed to be. It's a really competitive market, and I wanted to be here. So the types of information that I included on this was first resume. Then I included a deeper look into some of the projects to show, a resume is generally one page, but I wanted to show that I comprehended and understood these concepts. And I wanted to show that I could visually display this information in a really visually appealing way. So I was expressing my visualization through this portfolio and showing my skill through the portfolio. So again, I had resume, I had project experience, I had a page dedicated to certification. So I went out and got a bunch of certifications before I hit the job market. I had some letters of recommendation collected from over the years. I lifted a letter of recommendation from graduate school. I lifted a performance evaluation, and just wanted to give the perspective from people that knew me and add that in there. I also added in some elements of my athletic career to show that I'm well-rounded. I think I added some volunteer experiences. I just wanted people to get a true sense of who I was. And again, I think a resume at times is a little bit limited. So I wanted to put everything out there.
And it really was very well done. And again, it's a risk. You're doing something different, but in that case, high risk, high reward. But if anyone out there chooses to do something like that, know that there are some people that really want the traditional route, and that's okay too. But these things are worth trying. Okay, I think last question is just any, well, and then we can have closing words if you would like, but any books or resources that you would suggest people dig into if they're interested in learning more about data visualization?
So I think I referenced earlier on this presentation a book that I read. You'll see a lot of the concepts that I went over are in this book. It's Storytelling with Data, Data Visualization Guide for Business Professionals. I think that's a really good book. Honestly, where I learn is I think I shared, I like sports, right? So I love looking at visualization of sports statistics. And I go to like ESPN.com, and they've done an incredible amount of data visualization and trending and showing for like basketball. You could see where players like to shoot from on the court. So I'm constantly taking an inventory of data visualization. I know this isn't like a centralized book, but I'm constantly looking for things and visualizations to steal. I look at publications from large consulting firms, and I'm looking for the elements that the analyst is using to communicate. And I try to incorporate those elements into what I do. So obviously I could share a list of books I love to read. That's definitely something that I get a lot of enjoyment from. But the data visualization tips I pick up are really just from, sports statistics.
I think also YouTube is actually a great way to learn as well. There's a lot you can sit and just watch videos on Tableau, Excel, PowerPoint even. You don't necessarily need to take a course in something. You can just go try to watch a video on the specific tool or technique that you're looking to learn. So
Rebecca, Yeah, that's a great point. I learned Tableau on my own, and I learned it, well, I guess through those YouTube videos. Everything that you're looking to do in these, any analytical application, Tableau specifically, there's going to be information available to you. You could learn that on your own. Absolutely. So I encourage you all to dig into some of that if you're interested in going there.
We're almost at time. We'd like to give everyone a little bio break before the 10 a.m. But Andrew, thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic and interesting and informative. And, you know, I think a very important lecture, just given the fact that data is just incredibly important part of healthcare and will continue to be. Anything that you want to say to the audience before we jump off?
No, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This is great coming here, speaking with you all today. And I hope there's some lessons that you could learn from this story. Again, I've enjoyed this career. I look to continue down this path. It's been very fulfilling on my end. So
Much for being here. And everyone, I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the next few lectures for today. So thank you.